This is Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today's guest is Tim Coleman. He's the editor and host of the podcast and website Moving Pictures Film Club. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you so much for having me, Robert. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I am doing well. Thank you.
All right. Well, today we are talking about Quentin Tarantino. This is actually going to be our first episode in the Quentin Tarantino series that I'm doing. And we are starting off, of course, with the two movies that launched him, and that's Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction.
Indeed.
Both of these movies, they had quite the effect on me. When they came out, 1994, when Pulp Fiction came out, I had not heard of Reservoir Dogs before I heard of Pulp Fiction. And I was 20 when Pulp Fiction came out. So it came out right at the right time to hit an impressionable young like film lover. And I had heard that it was coming out, and then but in all the press that was coming out about it, they'd been talking about, oh well, this is the second movie by this guy, and his first movie was was a huge, like, not hit, wasn't a huge hit, but it was like what put him on the map. And so I went back and I found Reservoir Dogs on VHS and bought it and wore that sucker out until Pulp Fiction came out.
Amazing.
So so for me it was like, I don't know, those two movies kind of changed my views on film in a way that just kind of opened my eyes up to what film could be. I guess it's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, it was formative for sure. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can really identify with that. I remember seeing very similarly, I saw Pulp Fiction first on VHS rentals, so that would have probably have been 95, I guess, like, because back in the day films would take a little while to get to rental. Nowadays films are at the cinema and they're out to buy on DVD and Blu-ray in about 4 months, but like I remember back in the day you'd wait like a good 6 months for VHS rental, and then you have to wait again like another 6 months to a year to be able to buy it. So there was this kind of painful delay of getting your hands on things. But yeah, so I would have been in 95, I would have been 14, and I remember our family rented it, and I just watched it with my folks, and it felt like, kind of like you just said, it kind of caused somebody who's kind of discovering cinema and like is already a film fan, but like perhaps it really opened my eyes to what cinema could be and reinvented and played with the form in a way which I personally hadn't seen before. Like I'd not seen a non-linear narrative before I saw Pulp Fiction. And just things like the structure of that film, how cool it was, its use of music, it just really, I felt like I'd been awakened to something, yeah, for sure. And then went back and found out Reservoir Dogs after Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good way of putting it. It was an awakening of, like, because up until then, of course, I was a movie fan. I'd grown up, luckily, my parents were fairly unrestrictive as to what I could watch. I wasn't like, I could watch R-rated movies. I grew up in the slasher era of the 80s, and I got to see most of that stuff here and there. We didn't always have HBO, but we had it on occasion, and so we would record things. So we had a huge tape library. Every tape had like 3 movies on it, and it was just like and it would be the most random mixes ever.
Hmm.
And it was just like whatever came on. So we'd just record a bunch of stuff. So it was, so I got to see a lot of movies growing up, but it wasn't until 94 when
Mm.
Pulp Fiction came out, and when Kevin Smith's Clerks came out, and that was kind of a weird
Yeah,
one-two punch for me.
yeah.
And there was so much of a, I don't know, they both hit me right at the moment. And there was a time where I really wanted to be a director after that
Mm.
point and wanted to
Mm.
really make movies and stuff. It didn't go anywhere. I went to college for a little bit to try to do it, but um, it didn't form for me. But
Yeah.
they still had such a lasting impact on me that it's just, I don't know. It's hard to like describe unless you were in that moment. Like you said, like
Mm.
you saw it, and just, it's one of those things that hits you at the right moment, right age, and everything
Mm.
to kind of change your life.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it was like the first time I'd seen films which felt like it was made by somebody who also loved the same films I loved. Like
Mm-hmm.
um, Tarantino, of course, famously worked as a video store clerk, and so
Mm-hmm.
somebody like the movie Clerks, I think is a really good comparison point where one of the main characters in that film, Randall, is a video store clerk,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Kevin Smith himself worked in a 7-Eleven style convenience store. So it felt like this is a film which was made by someone who was just a little bit older than me, but loved film, would watch a lot of films, was really into the kind of fantastical rhythms of dialogue. Like
yeah,
both those films are incredibly written. Like and of course Tarantino became more established, I guess, as one of his big MOs was this kind of rat-a-tat super fluid, super cool dialogue. I mean that's of course the opening scene of Pulp Fiction. I think in the screenplay it's described that those two characters, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, are talking in a rapid fire His Girl Friday
right.
style, and so even in the way that Tarantino would write his screenplays, where he's referencing other films. Yeah, and so I think seeing those kind of films which are very self-aware, made by young, hungry guys, it felt like an absolute shot in the arm for somebody who was perhaps more certainly at my age. I was watching some horror stuff as well. Like my family were quite liberal, as it sounds
Yeah.
like yours were. Like
Oh yeah.
stuff like John Carpenter movies and James Cameron movies and that kind of thing were already part of my regular diet. But like early 90s, particularly 94, that was the year of Forrest Gump, of course, where
Yeah.
it stole the Oscars from superior films like Pulp
Oh yeah.
Fiction, Shawshank
Oh yeah.
Redemption. And like
Yeah.
no, yeah, well, I mean, what a year.
Don't
No
get me
disrespect to
started on that, man. Because like, seriously, like, don't get me wrong. I think that Forrest Gump is a good movie. It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
when you put it up against both Pulp Fiction and Shawshank Redemption, it just doesn't hold. And I'm like,
no,
what was going on that year? So, and
yeah,
that's kind of where I lost, like, and I didn't have much respect for the Academy at that point either. But that was a seminal moment where I just was like, okay, this is a joke, right? These movies are so
yeah,
much better, and even my 20-year-old brain knew those movies were better. So
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I think it kind of speaks to that really interesting contrast, though, between like, I mean, I quite like Forrest Gump still. Like the last time I saw it, anyway, I haven't
Yeah.
seen it for quite a long time, but it's a very wholesome, very. I mean, it's about as middle of the road as you can get, I think, in terms of
Yeah.
wide-ranging appeal. And then you've got Pulp Fiction, which is this kind of counterculture, super violent, super sweary, confrontational,
Yeah.
like indie movie. And so I think in that context, it felt like, it felt like a literal shot of adrenaline to the chest, much like Mia Wallace
Yeah.
gets administered in the middle of that movie. It felt like you were being just like shaken out of your Forrest Gump like malaise and woken up.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was it. It's just so hard to quantify just how game changing Pulp Fiction was, and to see it lose so much to Forrest Gump, which, like you said, is a very middle of the road, very safe, very wholesome movie in so many ways.
Mm,
And I like it. Don't get me wrong. I love Forrest Gump.
mm,
For the most part. There's bits I
mm,
don't like, but for the most part, I love it. But Pulp Fiction was such a game-changing moment. And you don't have a lot of Forrest Gump imitators. You got a
mm.
ton of Pulp Fiction imitators. Everybody was trying to imitate
Right,
what Tarantino had done in the wake of that. And
right.
most, if not all, were unsuccessful. But
Mm,
you don't start a movement like that and like just dismiss it. And
mm.
but that's why I'm just like, okay, the award shows are just, they're just fake. Nobody cares. They don't know what
Yeah,
they're doing.
I mean, it doesn't stop me but having that emotional buy-in though when there's a film that you care about. Like I remember being really energized when Parasite won a few years ago and being like, "Oh, cool." I
Yeah.
know it's all political and everything, and it's not like you said. You got to take it with a big old fistful of salt as to whether the best film actually wins every year. But
Oh yeah.
I do like it when you have those moments where something which is a bit more transgressive or subversive breaks out and
Yes.
gets recognized.
Absolutely. And I was glad to see that at least, when it came down to it, that Pulp Fiction did win for writing that year. And
Yep,
so,
yep.
and that was a very important win just to show that, sure, this other movie may have won, but Pulp Fiction's really the better written
Mm,
movie. And
mm.
so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
absolutely.
but let's go back to the beginning. Let's head back to 1992 and go back to Reservoir Dogs. Uh, like I said, when before Pulp Fiction came out, I grabbed that tape, and you have to remember that back in the day, in the 80s at least, when VHS came out, VHS was not available to buy. You
Mm,
couldn't. I mean, not unless you had money, because every tape was about $100 each, and they
mm,
were they were sold for rentals. So
mm,
only rental places were buying them, and they made their money back by renting them out,
mhm,
and uh, that's how it mostly they did it. It was like the late 80s when they started making mid to late 80s when they started making tapes available for purchase.
mm,
And
mm,
so by 92, when that came out, thankfully, it was a lot cheaper and a lot more readily available. You had a lot
mm,
of the Suncoast videos and stuff like that available. Uh,
mm,
so grabbing that was interesting. I think it was around that same time that I had also grabbed another Tarantino movie, uh, which was True Romance. Uh,
mm,
although he wrote that one, he didn't direct it. Uh,
mhm,
but yeah, between all three of those movies, it was like a game changing moment for me. And plus, you had the mythology of Quentin Tarantino himself.
mm,
This guy who was a video store clerk who managed to write some good movies and was able to break out and direct. And it was the start of this, not the start, but there was this wave of indie directors at the time, including Kevin Smith and
mm,
um, man, I'm blanking now. Richard Linklater, um, you know, Robert Rodriguez, a bunch of them that
mm, mm,
came together later on to do Four Rooms, and but Reservoir Dogs. When I got that, that was it's it was such a interesting and brutal movie.
mm,
It's you like I hadn't, don't get me wrong, I hadn't seen a lot, like I'd seen a lot of the big Hollywood action type stuff up until then, especially during the 80s. And this was something different. This was, more old school, more felt, it feels like even today, it feels more like a 70s throwback,
yeah,
which, of course, is what he's meaning to do. And it's just a fun movie. It between the
mm,
dialogue and the tension, and that's what I think is nice about Tarantino's movies in general. He ratchets the tension up
mm,
um, to such a high degree that every movie of his is just suspense the whole way through.
Mm,
And
mm,
this one was what this one just is a great calling card right out the gate.
mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
just I remember seeing Reservoir Dogs after Pulp Fiction, and I mentioned I was a little bit, I think, younger than you when I came to these films. I was
Mhm.
about 14, 15, and I remember my folks turned off Reservoir Dogs about halfway through when we got to the ear scene. And I was forbidden to watch it by my parents for about 6 months. And so I had about 6 months of just pleading them with them and begging them. And eventually it was coming on television here in the UK anyway. And they kind of relented. And so I immediately went out and bought it. And I had this like VHS box set of it where they had a few special editions here in the UK. So
Oh, okay.
I had like edition where I had the VHS tape. You had like a Joe Cabot's little black book, like a chrome Zippo lighter with Reservoir Dogs on it, which I still have
Wow.
somewhere. Um, and yeah, I just watched it twice in one day because I was just like, I've been waiting for so long for this film, so just get it into my eyes. Um, yeah, but like you're completely right about the tension. I think Reservoir Dogs is an incredibly tight film, and for a director who is sometimes criticized now in the latter stages of his career for being a little bit too long, a little bit like someone maybe needs
Hmm.
to rein in the length of some of his movies. Uh, some say. I mean, um, but Reservoir Dogs is absolutely like ratchet tight, and again, like deploying that kind of similar non-linear structure that had
Yeah.
been seen in Pulp Fiction. Like it's a heist movie without a heist in it. Like there's this, which is an incredible idea, and you've got
Oh,
like
yeah.
you've got that ticking clock of Mr. Orange, played by Tim Roth, bleeding to death throughout the course of the whole film. Um, and then the story about how these criminals came unstuck, told in flashback. It's I think it's for me, it's still probably in my top three Tarantino movies. I think it's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's definitely it's it's funny too for me. Like I enjoy these movies. They I probably haven't seen them in a long time. Uh, up until I rewatched them for this, mostly because I had watched them so much
Mm.
when I was younger, especially when I first had them. They were just staples of mine that I would put on whenever I was
Yeah, yeah.
wanting to watch a good movie, whatever. And especially Reservoir Dogs, I'm sure I wore that tape out before even Pulp Fiction came out.
Mm.
Just like it, just letting it wash over me every time. And uh, like I still enjoy them. I love Tarantino's complete filmography and everything like that. But I do think that what he does now in his later half of his work, I tend to enjoy those a little bit more.
Okay.
Maybe because I feel like he's a more mature
Hmm.
filmmaker. He's found his voice, um, and that he lets you kind of luxuriate in the length of the movies now. Like you
Hmm.
said, whereas Reservoir Dogs is very tight and very, quick, that his movies nowadays tend to be a little longer. He lets you sit through things. He
Mm.
plays out that tension even more so in a lot of these newer movies. And so I think that, Reservoir Dogs being as tight as it is, having the tension it does is a very good. It's such a strong movie right out the gate
Mm.
for a filmmaker that it's definitely one to compare to in anything,
Yeah.
especially compared to any of his other movies. It's it just shows that even from the beginning he was a good writer, a great director, just somebody who obviously Hollywood needed to look for in that way,
Mm.
somebody to shake things up and
Mm.
show the new guard was there.
Mm.
So
Yeah, definitely, and somebody who I think was very much schooled and literate, not just in mainstream American cinema, but in world cinema as well. Because we should
yes.
we should say Reservoir Dogs is ostensibly if not a remake, then a film which heavily draws on Ringo Lam's City on Fire. Um,
Right.
and certainly for me, like my way of hearing about City on Fire was through Reservoir Dogs. So there's that kind of reverse engineering
Yeah.
film school for cinephiles where you go, oh man, I love this, and then you read about how he's drawing down from these references which are perhaps a bit more off the beaten track from the mainstream. Yeah, again, it was just really, really refreshing and something which we hadn't seen as much at the time, I don't think, in a way that had quite captured the public imagination in quite the same way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, his film references, I know he gets accused of stealing and
Mm,
um
yeah.
relying on them a little too much. And I think that's unfair because most, if not all, filmmakers steal from other movies.
Hmm.
He's just blatant about it. He's not apologetic about it. He's like, this is
Mm,
where I got this scene. I'm making it my own,
hmm.
and take it or leave it. And
Hmm.
I think, but like you said, though, the one thing about that is that when he does take a scene from something, he admits it. He says, yeah, this is where I got this scene. This is what I'm doing. And then you can go back and go, okay, well, that's a movie I want to go see now. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, is great about that, because it's not just he's not just homaging a particular scene or a particular style or something and just leaving it to the audience to kind of figure it out. He's like, no, this is who I was influenced by. This is what I was influenced by. And you
Yeah.
can go back and see these movies because that's how he was as a video store clerk. He had access to all the movies that were there, and he enjoyed all the references and everything that came his way, including French New Wave and Asian cinema, and all of this that combined into this stew pot of filmmaking for him. And that's what I admire a lot in his
Mm,
filmmaking, is that he has taken on that and said, yes, I steal, but
yeah.
this is who I steal from. Go watch these movies too.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic for me, because he's not just going, you know, don't see these other movies. He's like, no, go watch these other movies. He's
Yeah.
such a film fan that he
Yeah.
wants to do that. And then, like, owning the New Beverly Cinema now in Los Angeles, he puts out these movies. He helps
Mm,
program these um showings at his theater, and so that way people are getting exposed to lots of different things that they otherwise might not even be aware of. Because I don't think there's a
mm,
lot, like, even up until he started making it. Sure, people in genre circles, like or um, people who love film to a certain degree, will know of all these movies, but there's still stuff that will
mm,
pop up that you're just like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't even know about that movie. I'll go check that out. And so I
mm.
think that's what's fascinating and exciting about his work.
Yeah, 100%. There's a real kind of dialogue that seems to happen between Tarantino and his audiences through watching his films, and it maybe harks back to that history of him being a video store clerk, that you feel like in watching his movies you're having a really cool conversation with this cool guy behind the counter who's saying, oh cool, I see you're renting out X, why don't you also rent out Y and Z as well, and have
Yes.
yourself a triple bill, and I love that element of getting educated. I feel like with like the advent of like boutique Blu-ray labels
Yeah.
now,
Yes.
with places like Arrow Video, and Severin and Screen Factory, and there's quite a good number of them, um, that they are not only like rescuing titles from obscurity, but it kind of has a similar community vibe to it, where you'll be like, okay, I've come across this title which I like, and then there'll be like a wealth of material, like a booklet or a podcast episode or liner notes, which will kind of give you another five things that you could go and
Oh
follow
yeah.
up, and it's this wonderful snowballing effect about just falling deeper and deeper into this kind of cult film rabbit hole.
Oh yeah. No, I think definitely if you're a fan of Quentin Tarantino, you're a fan of films in general, this is like kind of the era to live in right now because
Mm,
of, like you said, these boutique labels, Scream Factory, Arrow, Severin, all of them are doing such great work just putting out all the obscure stuff, all the stuff that's, the major labels just aren't putting out.
mm,
And they're making deals with some of the major labels to put out
mm,
the stuff that hasn't been out since VHS even. And so it's great because if you are a film fan, if you're interested in that, the more obscure work, the more maybe foreign stuff,
mm.
then you have access to it in a way you didn't. Plus the streaming services, streaming
Yeah,
provides, that's what's great about streaming is that you have, sure, there's a ton of different streaming services and it's hard to keep up with them all. But if you have a specific interest, say you're into Criterion movies, they have a freaking streaming app now. So,
yeah,
that's what's great is that you have this new access to stuff that if you're a physical collector, if you just want to watch the movies on streaming, you have these avenues now that
mm.
make it like you have your own virtual video store that you can
I
choose
know.
from.
It's an incredible time to be alive. Like I kind of think back, like we kind of referred to it at the beginning of our conversation, with like the delay of just seeing a mainstream movie from
Oh
when it
yeah.
was at the cinema through to getting it on rental, through to if you actually wanted to buy a copy. That could be a long period of time. So if you wanted something that was off the beaten track, like how much more so would the effort be to go and try and dig it out, like to go to collectors papers or collectors fairs or
Oh yeah.
find it on mail order or something. And nowadays I'm like, it is crazy. I can like watch a Bergman movie on my phone. I, oh, you want to watch the complete works of Tarkovsky? No trouble. Like you can have that in your hand on next day on Amazon Prime delivery, and
Yep.
it's an absolute unbridled gift to cinephiles to have the entire wealth of cinema history at your fingertips. I mean, all that coming with the caveat that please do keep physical media alive, because although there are those specialist streaming services, anything that's on a streaming service is subject to the vagaries and whims and
Yeah.
fluctuations in licensing agreements. So if you want to be sure that you actually have something that you can watch, I don't think anything replaces having a copy on your shelf.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And especially because you don't get the special features if you just watch on streaming. There's so many
Mm,
movies that if you enjoy a specific movie, get it on physical if you can.
mm,
One, so you always have that backup. Like I'm one of those people who, if I love a movie, I try to get it on disc. Usually, especially because if it's a newer movie, you get the digital copy with you anyway.
mm.
And so I heavily have a large digital library as well, more so than I have a physical library. But a lot of my
Okay.
horror stuff is through Scream Factory and through a lot of the other stuff. So I've got a lot of stuff that I just don't even have on digital. But if I have it on both, I'll tend to watch it on digital, of course.
Yeah.
Just the ease of doing that. If I just want to pop the movie on and just watch it real quick, so much easier than getting up, going over, grabbing the disc, putting it in, having to sit
Yep.
through the FBI warning, and
Yep. Yep.
um, and then but if I want to watch the special features, they're available to me on disc. Audio commentary is
Mm,
always a great thing to be able to listen to, and
yeah.
definitely keep getting physical media because if we don't get the physical media, they're going to stop making it.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Although I've had to put in some boundaries with myself because I haven't even counted, but it's probably something. We're in the hundreds now of discs which I've bought. I have not yet watched. So,
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, like my wife and I have this conversation where she's like, "Have you bought another Blu-ray?" I'm like, "I have bought another Blu-ray. I'm sorry," but yeah, so I'm kind of like trying to like just bring that under control, or at least like get through the
Yes.
backlog before buying too much more new stuff.
Oh man, I think we're all guilty of that. Anybody who buys physical, we are all guilty of having like a huge like shelf just of unopened stuff or unwatched
Yeah,
stuff, and it's
yeah.
yeah, it's ridiculous. I have several movies on my shelves as well that
Mm.
I bought like, you know, a few years ago that just have still not seen the light of day that I
Yeah.
really need to get to watch it at some point. But yeah, was part of the reason why I started the podcast was like, okay, I'm going to finally get this stuff if I can, break it out. So
Yeah. No, it's good. It's great to have that kind of excuse. Not that we need an excuse, but yeah, to have the yeah. And every now and again, though, like just when I feel a little bit bad about it, something will go out of print, and I'll be like, "Oh, I'm glad I picked that up because I
oh
don't have to
yeah.
worry about it now," you know. And yeah, yeah, that's it. It is a fine line between being overly materialistic and actually preserving the art form that you love.
Oh
And
yeah.
there's that sweet spot in the middle.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm actually doing after this Quentin Tarantino series of episodes. I'm actually moving on to doing a Kevin Smith series of episodes, and
Nice, nice.
yeah, it's going to be fun, except for the problem of Dogma and Red State. Both of those have been wildly out of print, and
Ah, okay.
and a lot of his movies. A few years ago, I went. I used to have a big Funko Pop collection,
Mm,
and I sold them all off, and I was
mhm,
using the money to help kind of populate my movie collection a little bit more.
mhm.
And so I bought like all the Tarantino stuff. I went to eBay and bought his Tarantino 20th anniversary collection, and then I was also trying to find all the Kevin Smith movies because I had them all on DVD originally, sold them all or gave them all away or whatever, and then
Mm.
I had was just trying to recollect it all. And Dogma and Red State and a couple of the other ones had gone out of print.
Oh, okay.
Some of the other ones have come back into print, but Dogma and Red State have never come back in. So I had to buy
Okay.
those through eBay, and that was not cheap.
Oh man, yeah,
So
yeah.
Dogma alone cost me $80 just for that. So
Wow. Oh, for
and
real,
that was
man.
cheap. So
I Yeah, oh, you're making me think because I have Dogma from an original pressing. I should like maybe I should be checking out how much some of this stuff is worth. But not that I don't think I would sell it because like I love Dogma. I think it's a very underrated film. But yeah, it is funny. Sometimes it's the stuff you don't expect, right? Where you're like,
oh yeah.
where I'll be like, okay, yeah, I want to just check out. I don't know, like this obscure 80s slasher that I've just read about. I'll be like, come on, man, like no one's talking about this film. It can't be that expensive. And you head over to eBay, you're like, all right, so it's like $30 for this, like, fuzzy 20-year-old DVD just because it was done
Yeah.
once and never done again. So there you go.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, if you can find the stuff, grab it if you can. Um,
Mm,
especially especially if you can get it affordably. Because
yeah.
I definitely I paid 80 for Dogma, I paid 40 for Red State. I know I paid
Oof,
another
okay.
40 for Jersey Girl of all things, but it was out of print at the time, and I didn't think it was going to come back in print, and I think it came back in
Mm,
print not too long later. So I was like,
okay.
oh crap.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but it's all right. I've got them
Yeah,
all now. I've got the whole collection. I feel good about it.
that's good. Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
Clerks 3 on the way as well.
yes, Clerks 3. Finally, we're
Mm,
finally getting some movies. And I know Kevin Smith has kind of transitioned into more of a personality rather than a filmmaker. So, but it's great
hmm.
to see him returning back to film again. Apparently,
Yeah,
he's got two movies on the horizon. That one and Kilroy was here. So,
yeah,
but
yeah. I mean, you mentioned Robert Rodriguez earlier as well as like
yes,
another kind of filmmaker in a similar sort of sphere as Tarantino. And of course, they've made films together, like From
yes,
Dusk Till Dawn and the
the
Grindhouse
Grindhouse
movies.
moves. Yeah.
But yeah, what's your relationship like with like those kind of early '90s Rodriguez movies, like El Mariachi and Desperado and
I
Los Valentines?
I really like them. I don't own them currently, but I've always enjoyed them. I do have Grindhouse. I have the Machete movies
Hmm.
because those are just nuts.
Mm.
But yeah, no, Rodriguez's Mexico trilogy is it. I'm not as I wouldn't say I'm not as big a fan, but I'm definitely, he was one of those ones that his style is great and fun, but he went off and did the kids movies that did Spy Kids, which was great because my kids were right at the right age for all of those when they
Nice.
came out. So I was like, oh hey, here's one of my favorite filmmakers making some fun little kid movies. Here, watch these are fun.
Yeah.
And no, I really enjoy his work, especially Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Those are great movies.
Mm,
He's I love Sin City.
yeah, yeah.
The work he's done with Tarantino directly from Dusk Till Dawn and Grindhouse. Yeah, I talk about those in length on a couple more episodes in this series. Yeah, they're fun stuff. He makes great movies. I've not seen whatever what is it, Battle Angel,
Oh yeah,
Alita. I haven't seen that
yeah,
one yet. Um,
yeah. Elite
it's
Battle Angels an interesting one, I think. It's
yeah,
because I mean in the UK it's a 12, so I guess that's a PG-13 in the States.
okay, yeah,
But it feels like he got around it just by making all the blood blue, because they're
yeah.
robots. And I took my daughter, she was like 11 at the time, to see it, and man, she was shaken because it was like people having their eyes ripped out, people being
Oh
put through
wow,
grinders, and I was like, come on, come on, Robert, this is just you've taken it as far as you can, just made the blood blue.
yeah,
But
that's
but
funny.
yeah, but it's interesting because it felt like in the early 90s there was that group of filmmakers like Smith, like Tarantino, like Rodriguez, Roger Avery as well as another Tarantino
Yes,
collaborator in his film Killing Zoe. Um, and then in the UK we had Guy Ritchie in the mid 90s with
yeah,
films like
yeah,
Lock, Stock, were very much influenced by Tarantino, and that kind of British gangster subgenre that we still kind of have, but like it was particularly popular then. And it felt, yeah, like those guys were all kind of playing in a similar sandbox.
yeah.
That yeah, I don't think any of those films topped the 1-2 punch of Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, but
Oh no.
certainly are very interesting in their own way.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. That's the thing. It's as much of a Kevin Smith fan as I am, and I like Rodriguez, um, that nothing compares to, like you said, the 1-2 punch of those of Tarantino's movies. He came
Mm,
out the gate so strong with his movies that it's been hard to uh top in a way. And I think that, like, for me, like, I think that Tarantino's done much better work after Pulp
mm,
Fiction. But there are so many people who think that Pulp Fiction is just his masterpiece, that and I may not agree with it, but I can understand why people
mm,
think that way. Having gone back and rewatched it for the first time in a long time, it was a different experience. I feel like Pulp Fiction is a lot more experimental than a lot of his
okay.
other films, before or since.
Hmm.
Uh, you're getting a lot of you're seeing the start of a lot of his filmmaking techniques. I mean, you get some of it in Reservoir Dogs, but you get a lot more of it in Pulp Fiction. And it's interesting to watch it now and see all of it in hindsight compared to most of the other work that he's done since. And
Yeah.
to see that there's a dreamlike quality at times in Pulp Fiction that doesn't necessarily exist in the later movies. um,
Mm,
and I
mm.
think that Pulp Fiction itself was heavily influenced by his love and interest in the French New Wave. And I think
Yes.
that's the most glaring example of it is in that movie. Just, he's very much more about the feel of it.
Mm,
And you get a lot more of, you get the drive with the Travolta, when he's doped up on the heroin, and you get
mm.
the drive with Butch in the back of the cab, which is obviously projected against a back screen. And
Mm.
there's all these weird old school film things going on in this that, like I said, lend it that dream like quality in a way. And Pulp Fiction feels like more like a fable
Mm,
than
mm.
maybe some of his other work.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point because I thought that certainly his more recent films, I think in particular of Inglourious Bastards, Django Unchained, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, were explicitly fables. You know, they're kind of
Right.
reinventing historical moments, and but telling them in a way where we have a different outcome. Um,
Right.
and but so it's interesting to kind of consider that dreamy allegorical fable quality existing right from film number two. Um, yeah, that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah, it's something that, I having watched all of his movies, and this is the first in the series, but this is actually the last of the ones that I'm recording, that
Mm,
having gone through all of the movies kind of before this and then rewatching this one last has been, that's where, like, it's kind of really interesting to have seen it like that,
mhm.
to compare what's come after to this one, and to see just how, like, dreamlike and not off kilter, but just, it's hard to explain, because it's just, watching it in that way was a different experience than, most times when you're going to watch, his filmography, most people are just going to watch it from Reservoir Dogs to, straight through to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That
Mm,
watching it in kind of this disjointed way that I watched it, you tend to see connections, you see comparisons, you make comparisons to everything, and just seeing that it definitely, Pulp Fiction was one of those movies that over time has, definitely it's become lesser compared to, his other movies for myself.
mm,
But upon rewatch and everything, because of that dreamlike quality, because of that, fable aspect of it, that you kind of see that he's kind of been making fables all along, and
mm.
these interesting little takes on, because each movie's kind of a genre experience in their own right.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
one has been. And to see him really, because whereas I think that Reservoir Dogs is an ode to, the heist movie,
Mhm,
but Pulp Fiction, as much as it's a crime movie and everything, it's like it's got an ethereal quality to it that elevates it beyond just a simple crime film. And like I said, I
mm,
think that has a lot to do with the influence the French New Wave to him, that he
mm,
puts so much of that kind of quality into it, that it just, it informs it way more than something like Reservoir Dogs, because Reservoir Dogs is very influenced by the Asian cinema at the time,
yeah,
the Killer, City
yeah.
on Fire, that kind of stuff. But where Pulp Fiction is kind of something different, it's on a different level for sure.
Mm,
And
mm,
he continues that, and I think that's where he continues beyond this, is every movie has become something much more beyond the genre that it's trying to uh, imitate. And so,
mm.
it's that's what I feel like Pulp Fiction was the beginning of that.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting observation. I feel like one of the things which I love about his later films is that they dial into an emotional register, which perhaps Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs do a bit less. It's not that those films aren't emotional. Like I don't think you can watch the final moments of Reservoir Dogs, for example, and not be moved by the relationship between Harvey Keitel's Mr. White and Tim Roth's Mr. Orange,
Right.
um, or like the Gold Watch monologue by Christopher Walken in Pulp
Right.
Fiction. Like I think those they do have that emotional register, but I think when I remember being just really surprisingly moved by like the very end of Once Upon a Time in America, sorry, in Hollywood, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and the if you like, the saving of Sharon Tate and just being like, oh, just finding that a very surprisingly delicate moment for a film which literally
Right.
has a flamethrower kill in about
Right.
5 minutes before. And similarly, like my favorite Tarantino movie personally is Django Unchained, and that is in large part to the kind of pairing of Jamie Foxx with Christoph Waltz, and Waltz's character is this guy
Yes.
who is like the antithesis of his Hans Landa character from Inglourious. Um, where he kills DiCaprio's character and then just holds his hands up and says, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself." It's a
Yeah.
beautiful moment of just like this kind of, "I'm sorry, I can't stand to live in the same world as this horrendous, this horrendous Calvin Candy.
Right.
I had to take him out." Um, and it's got this really beautiful emotional depth to some of those later films, which I don't think we get in the same way at the beginning of his career.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I think that, that's what I say when when I say that he's matured as a filmmaker, is that his writing, his depth has gotten so much better along the way,
Mm.
that he his characters have always been interesting, but his characters, I feel like they didn't really become as fascinating or as deeply fascinating as they become until after, like I would say maybe Kill Bill and after.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they
Mm-hmm.
really become after Inglorious, like from Inglorious Bastards on the latter half of his career. I think when he starts making these revisionist
Mm-hmm.
movies, that is where he is taking that. Every movie after that point becomes so multi-layered
Mm.
in what you're seeing, the various side stories, especially in Inglorious Bastards. Django Unchained is my favorite as well.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, it's like you said. I mean, Christoph Waltz in that is so fantastic, and watching Jamie Foxx, watching that character transform throughout the movie is just it's so fun to watch.
Oh
Um,
man, the scene where towards the end where he begins his rip roaring rampage of revenge and he kicks down the door,
yes,
and I think the line is something like "D'Artagnan, motherfuckers," and just starts blowing those
yeah,
guys away. You just, I don't know, the rush of adrenaline of seeing a black man destroy a bunch of slavers was so
oh yeah,
strong. I was like, yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, I don't that is the height for me of Tarantino. Was it's violent and it's funny, but it's got a point, and
yes,
there's a deep catharsis of seeing justice rain down.
yeah. I think it's his
Yeah.
best movie. Yeah, I think that his other movies of that era are so good and everything, but Django, just like you said, it's the most violent. But it's so cathartic. It's just such an amazing movie.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's
it's
great.
but yeah, I mean, with the first two, with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, you can see the seeds taking place. He's
Hmm.
already at that point. He's already such a good writer. He makes believable characters. His dialogue is great, and
Hmm.
that's what's fun about it too. Is that he's always written these um, characters. He's
Mm.
always given them these moments where they can all just sit and talk to each other, and you get to know the characters, and it's
Mm.
in such a believable way that you can connect with them, even with some of the most despicable people,
Yeah,
that you you get lost in it. But
yeah,
compared to what comes later, it's like it's so like, to me, these two movies are great, but what comes later is where I'm the most fascinated.
mm.
And but going back and watching these again for the first time in a while was also great, because you get to see those seeds being planted. You get to see the everything that goes into what he becomes later, and
Yeah,
and he plants the seeds in Reservoir Dogs. They take root in Pulp Fiction, and they just grow from there. And it's so fun to watch.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I feel like they kind of really helped establish as well part of the broader aesthetic or I guess you could call like almost like a package that Tarantino brought to popular
Yes.
culture because like I remember vividly like the posters that you'd get with Pulp Fiction, it being like the first time that I'd seen character posters, where you'd have like the
Yes.
Reservoir Dogs, like you'd have like the famous one, of course, with the guys in the suits, and then like white background with blood running across it. But there was also like a Mr. Blonde poster, a Mr. White poster,
Yeah.
and then like a quote from them, and very similarly again for Pulp Fiction. And on top of that as well, the soundtracks. And there's been
Oh
like one
yeah.
of the first time where like the soundtrack was an essential part of
Oh yeah.
the the purchase or the world. Like, I mean, I'm sure that many cinephiles would still buy soundtracks anyway, but being able to pick up the CD of Reservoir Dogs and be like, track one is like the DJ, or track
Yeah.
two is like an exit of dialogue. And so you didn't just get like Little Green Bird, you'd get like you get like the Harvey Keitel's taco speech.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, and it was so different and so immersive. And again, it just felt like it really changed the pop culture landscape.
Oh yeah.
Like I was on a podcast called Just for Kids recently talking about Edgar Wright's Baby Driver and how like the use of pop music in that film really builds on the legacy and the groundwork which I think Tarantino laid with Reservoir
Oh
Dogs
yeah.
and Pulp Fiction. Like how many people had the Pulp Fiction soundtrack, and the first track is Pumpkin and Honey Bunny saying, if any of you motherfuckers move, I'll execute every last
Yeah.
one of you. Um, I'm sure I got that line slightly wrong. Apologies, but yeah.
That's all right. It's
Um,
different. It's different both times in the movie as well. So
there you go. I'll just pretend that that's it. I'm going for the unreliable narrator.
there you
Um,
go.
but yeah, just the integration of dialogue into the soundtrack, and yeah, I mean, it just kind of is further evidence, I think, to how like Tarantino's relationship with pop culture is so reciprocal, so fluid. He
Yeah.
doesn't just make these movies; he kind of makes these kind of cultural artifacts.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting you mentioned the individual character posters that you saw during that time period. Apparently that was, and it was just something I read, that it was something they only did for the UK market, with the
Ah,
individual
okay.
posters like that. And it was the first time that any studio had done that. And so now it's
Wow.
something they do like regularly. You every Marvel movie that comes out has like posters of all the characters and individual things. It's something they do now, but Reservoir Dogs was the first one to do that, and so that's fascinating to and especially it was
Mm,
only done in the UK at the time. So it's
that's so
funny that
interesting.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, going
Yeah.
going to what you said about the soundtracks. Yeah, the soundtracks, especially, yeah, I don't think I had the Reservoir. No, I did have the Reservoir Dogs. Yeah, I got both of the soundtracks because of course you have to get the soundtracks. His movies are just so fun. The music, such an essential part of all of his movies, that you have to have the soundtracks. You have to listen to them, and
Mm,
like you said, you get the little dialogue bits and everything. I feel like that when you listen to the soundtracks, you are missing a bit. I mean, that's what's nice about having the dialogue bits, is that you can kind of, in a way, while listening to just the soundtrack, you can kind of watch the movie in your mind,
mm,
from song to song. But I do feel like sometimes, like for me anyway, whenever I listen to a soundtrack, there's some songs that I don't care for, but they're so indelible to the movie that that
mm.
taking them out of the movie just feels not wrong, but just doesn't feel as essential. Like I can listen to
Right.
Little Green Bag or your Stuck in the Middle with You outside of the
Hmm.
movie, uh, because they're both great songs. But like watching, like listening to one of the other songs that's in there outside of the movie, I don't tend to do. But in the movie, he makes the music so essential to the scene that
Mm.
you just can't pull it out for me. And it's just so it's fascinating to have that aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I do feel I'm kind of showing my age slightly because one of the Reservoir Dogs songs got reused, didn't it, by the Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
forget what it's called. It's the Ooga Shaka song, like Ooga Shaku, Ooga
Yeah.
Shaku. And I know that everyone who is probably below the age of 25 thinks that's a Guardian song, but in my head, I'm like, come on, guys, it's a Reservoir Dogs song from now and
Right.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It popped up in the trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy. I was like, hey, that's the Reservoir Dogs song.
Yeah. It's got to be
And then
done.
it's like become so indelible to Guardians of the Galaxy now that it's just, I will allow them to share it because I am an MCU fan.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, they
Yeah.
use
No
it
shade
both
on
perfectly.
Marvel.
Yeah.
No shade on Marvel. But yeah, I don't know. It's like if yeah, I guess like Reservoir Dogs just means a lot to me, and you kind of just wanted to get credit where it belongs.
I feel
But
like James Gunn, Edgar Wright, they're both kind of, Tarantino errors in a way. They both
yeah, yeah,
meld music with movies very well. And they're both well
yeah,
known for it as much now. Edgar Wright
yeah.
more so in his more recent movies, not so much in the Cornetto trilogy. Uh, but uh,
Mm.
but
But no, yeah, you're right actually, because watched Gunn's Suicide Squad movie a few months ago, and
oh
I
yeah,
mean that's again another film which just has this killer soundtrack, which is very Tarantino-esque. Like it's
yeah,
ultra
oh
violent,
yeah,
ultra. I don't know, like Gunn has his own history with, like, for example, Troma movies. So like it's not like
yes,
the violence is Tarantino-esque, but like the use of music, it feels like
right,
Gunn is a yeah, again, just like playing in the same waters that Tarantino has been
absolutely.
kind of defining for 30 years.
Yeah. Speaking of Gun and Suicide Squad, I don't know if you've seen the Peacemaker TV series yet. Uh,
No, I hear it's excellent
uh,
though.
oh, it is very good. Yeah, it's if you enjoyed the Suicide Squad, then you'll enjoy this one.
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I just with these two movies, I feel like with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, I feel like they're two great beginnings. I feel like he's done much better work since.
Hmm.
That his growth as a filmmaker and as a writer shown as along the way, that he just continues to grow, and I feel like that both of these movies are still great in their own ways. And having gone back
Yeah.
and rewatched them, it's been, especially getting to watch these after I watched all the other movies, and
Mm.
getting to compare that growth, and seeing just even then just how good of a filmmaker he was in the beginning, and being reminded of just
Mm.
that feeling of what it was like, you know 30 years ago now, when
Yeah.
Reservoir Dogs came out, that it just,
Hmm.
everything that he did was game changing. And to watch that cultural,
Mm.
um you know that cultural moment coalesce into what it's become now, and
Mm.
to see his career as a whole
Mm.
um come from these two movies is it's been fun. It's been interesting to see where he's gone with it, and how things have changed, how
Yeah.
things have stayed the same. And it's just fascinating.
Amazing. You're inspiring me to do a big Tarantino rewatch.
Good. Yeah, I was inspired by my friend Ariel. She was watching, or she mentioned something about Death Proof, and I'd already been thinking about doing a Tarantino series, and so when she mentioned that, I was like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah.
So
Just gonna do it.
it gave me the excuse to rewatch all the movies again, and to reach out and try to grab everybody to come onto the show, and see what I could see what kind of fun conversations I could get up to. So thanks again to Ariel.
Amazing. Amazing stuff.
Yes. Yeah, it's been fun uh talking to everybody, and it's they're just such fun movies.
Yeah.
there's not, to me, there's not a bad one in the bunch. They're all great in their
Hmm.
own ways. They've just all been super fun.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I should say it's interesting you mentioned that Death Proof was the one which Ariel was talking about. That's the only Tarantino I've not seen, which I know is a massive blind spot. I remember it being kind of trashed when it came out. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm not really in a rush to see it. And then like I picked it up on DVD, like probably like it's one of my unwatched discs, right? I got it about 3 years ago, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll watch it at some point, but I really need to just kind of sit down and make the space for it because it's a bit ridiculous to have an unwatched Tarantino film on my shelf.
Definitely, yes. Definitely rewatch the whole filmography and definitely slip that one into the middle, uh,
Yeah,
right where it goes. So yeah, no, it's a fun movie for sure. You it's I use it's one of those ones that I used to think was lesser, mostly because when I watched it originally, I watched it as part of the Grindhouse experience. I
mm,
actually got to see it in theaters, and coming off of the high of Planet Terror, which is
mm,
like crazy, um, just nuts action and fun stuff going on, and then you get into more of a slow pace in the first half of Death Proof. That it's a weird come down like in that
sure.
experience of that whole thing. But watching it separately definitely is
Like,
it's not as jarring for sure.
sure.
So
Oh, cool. I'm looking forward to it.
yeah, it's definitely a fun movie. Kurt Russell turns in a great performance, as does everybody else, and that Zoe Bell, everybody. So
Yeah,
it's a fun movie.
amazing, amazing.
All right. Anything else you have to you want to mention about these two movies we haven't gotten to?
Uh, no, I guess just to I it's maybe an obvious point, but just I think even if Tarantino has made better movies since, and for me, I'm probably a little bit warmer on these two than you. So for my top three would be
Yeah.
Django Unchained, Reservoir Dogs, and Pulp Fiction. That would be the top three for
Okay.
me. Um, but I feel like even if people perhaps prefer other movies that he's made, there are so many iconic moments in these two films alone which have kind of permeated popular culture. So like
Right.
the ear scene in Reservoir Dogs, the slow motion walk in Reservoir Dogs, the Gimp scene in Pulp Fiction, like the diner scene in Pulp Fiction. It feels like you know certain films just influence pop culture
Oh yeah.
in a way where it's very difficult to quantify. Like you'll just see it in everything from like The Simpsons through to like countless imitators.
Yes.
And yeah, I feel like if you wanted to, like you probably couldn't throw a stick in the second half of the 90s without hitting a Tarantino reference in some kind of popular entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, he definitely left an indelible mark on the culture with just these two movies, especially Pulp Fiction. But
Yeah.
both of these movies have been referenced to death, and just in a way like that none of his other movies even touch. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I can't say for certain that I'm sure there are references to some of his other movies in other
Mm,
uh, portions of pop culture, but these two, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, had such a massive influence on the culture at the time, and just in general, that yeah, they can't be touched in terms of uh, their what they mean
mm,
in the long run. And yeah,
yeah.
it's
Yeah. And
go
the way
ahead.
they talk to each other as well,
Oh yeah.
because like we should say, like Tarantino's movies take place within one universe pretty much. And so like even in those first two movies, it's kind of canon that Toothpick Vic, played by Michael Madsen in Reservoir Dogs, is the brother of Vince Vega, played by Travolta in
Right.
Pulp Fiction. And like little details like they all smoke the same brand of cigarettes. Is it Red
Yeah.
Apple?
Red Apple.
Yeah, and I dig that as well. Like he was doing expanded universe stuff,
Yep.
20 years or 50, what was it, like probably 16 years before the MCU became a thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love all that Easter egg stuff.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. That's I've mentioned it in a couple of different episodes, but that definitely it I am a big fan of expanded universe kind of stuff like that. Um I always have been as a kid. I grew up reading Marvel comic books, and
Mm,
it's come full circle into the movies now, where they actually connect everything in the movies. But and I couldn't imagine something like that. That's something that I would have loved as a kid that they just were not doing back then, that they actually
mm.
finally get to do now. And good or bad, I love it. I know a lot of people, gives them a headache, but but I love
No, I
the
love it too.
interconnectedness of the MCU, and that goes back towards my love of, as a kid I grew up reading Marvel comics, I grew up reading Stephen King novels,
Mm,
um, and later on, once I became an adult, we had Tarantino movies, we had Kevin Smith movies that are all, not all,
mm,
but like uh, a nice handful of them are all connected.
mm,
And Elmore Leonard books, I got into him because of Tarantino
mm,
making Jackie Brown, and so he has an interconnected universe of characters that he has pop up here and there between all of his books. And so that, you give me a universe like that, I'm in, because
yeah.
that's my jam, because I love seeing those connections and getting to follow characters from one thing to another, or having references that, it's, as a fan, it's you get that payoff, you get that
Mm,
little wink and a nod to something that's bigger than just the one movie. And
yeah.
as a casual viewer, you can still enjoy everything, and not have to worry about catching all that stuff. And I think that's a problem that people are having with the MCU, is that everybody feels like they need to know all the connections, and you don't. And that's something
Mm,
that
mm,
I think that people need to realize, is that you can enjoy the one thing. They
yeah.
connect it for those of us that want to have all the connections and to see all that stuff.
Mm,
If you don't want to watch, say, Moon Knight, or the Eternals, or something else like that, you don't have to watch those properties,
mm,
because it's just, if that's not your thing, trust me, like
mm.
Moon Knight, I watched it, it was good, but I'm not as connected to the character, so I'm like, okay, yeah, it doesn't matter to me as much. But
Yeah.
if you want to watch everything, if you do watch everything, then you get those little payoffs, you get those little connections that are fun and more meaningful for you. But I think that's something that most people feel like, oh well, I have to watch everything to get all the no, you don't. You can
Mm,
skip them, you can skip around, you can choose what you want to watch in that, and still enjoy them. I think they've gotten
mm.
to a point now making these movies that they understand that they, you can watch the newest Doctor Strange movie, and sure, watching WandaVision will help that, but you don't
Mm.
necessarily, you get most of the information you need from the movie. And
Yeah.
so I think that's something
Yeah.
that people, don't uh don't understand. I went off on an MCU rant, but
No,
but
it's all good, man.
yeah, but I think that's what's fun about, Tarantino, and stuff like that, is as well,
Mm.
is that you get that deeper, more fun stuff if you have watched it all. But if you haven't watched it all, and you're just watching one movie here or there, or whatever, you're not going to catch those
Mm.
things, and it's okay. You're going to still enjoy the movies.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and they're,
Absolutely.
they're not as important, obviously, in Tarantino movies as they can be in the MCU, but they can also, it's just it's just fun, you know.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
have
No,
fun with the movies, everybody. That's all you got to do. Don't read into them too much.
yeah. No, it's all good. It's good.
All right. Well, I don't think I have anything else that I can think of that I want to mention on these movies. So I appreciate you coming on. I had a great time talking to you.
Thanks, man.
Uh,
Yeah, I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
yeah, I'll have to try and get you on for another episode in the future. Uh,
Cool. Yeah,
I'm
let's
gonna
let me
start
know.
doing some other directors stuff here and there. So definitely have some stuff in the works. So,
Amazing. Yeah, just let me know. It's been a pleasure.
yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, dude. Thanks, man. Take it easy.
Thanks again to Tim Coleman for coming on this episode. You can find him on Twitter at Moving Pix Club. Next episode, I talk to Kat Hughes about true romance and natural born killers. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.